with our next guest. That is Fleur Hassan-Nahoum. She's the former deputy mayor of Jerusalem, and she's now the Israeli Foreign Ministry Special Envoy. Good afternoon to you, Fleur.
Good afternoon,
Thank you
Julia.
so much for joining us. Lots to talk about in terms of what is going on in Gaza. But I mean, just first of all, is there a deal on the table, and did Israel put forward a deal? Because Joe Biden made this announcement, very interestingly, on the day that Donald Trump was convicted, and there was a press conference. He announced this. We've had no word yet, as far as I can tell, from a single Israeli government representative to say, yes, this is a deal that Israel put on the table and Israel agrees with. And we're told that Hamas agrees with the deal, apart from the fact they've changed virtually every single word in the deal. So even Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, has said, well, actually, the word that they're looking for is no. Is there a deal, and has anyone agreed to it?
No, there was a deal. There was a deal that the Americans offered based on a deal that Israel could live with and had accepted.
Right.
And Hamas, this is, I think, the 6th or the 7th time that they've said no, or their counteroffer is so ridiculous and impossible that essentially it is like saying no. And that's what we have. Hamas at the moment have zero incentive to accept a deal, because all of the pressure, instead of being on the genocidal regime of Hamas and instead of being on its enablers like Iran and Qatar, all the pressure's on Israel. It makes absolutely no sense. And this is why Hamas are being intransigent.
But even on social media now, and by the way, social media propaganda war 100% being won by Hamas at the current time. The fact that the BBC referred to them in their news broadcast as Palestinian group, I think, tells you that you've
they
lost.
Won't say terrorists.
No, I mean,
won't say terrorists.
You've lost that propaganda war, and that's been very dangerous because
Yep.
that's massively impacted American official support. It's not just what idiots on TikTok are talking about. It is actually impacting international policy and could possibly impact supply of arms and protection for Israel. But this is the thing: you're in this situation where the Hamas is holding hostages, is using the Palestinian people as human shields, committed this horrific massacre, and now they and the people they claim to represent are the victims, and Israel is the aggressor. And how do you change that narrative? Because that is, it would appear, the narrative, and certainly it's the narrative that around the Western world, most younger people believe, certainly. And even when you look at the polls of people who support Israel, it's not a majority.
Well, I think that more people support Israel than will claim they support Israel. I think that the bullies and the harassers and the people protesting are actually a very loud minority. I want to believe, and I do believe, according to polls, that most people, right-minded people, understand that Hamas is a terrorist group and that Israel is a sovereign democratic country that was attacked in the most brutal way. If you look at the context of the history of the region and the UK's intervention in many countries around the region and the US's intervention, nobody had these double standards that they're applying to Israel. And you're absolutely right, Julia. It's all about the propaganda war that Israel is not winning at all. How do you turn around the narrative? At this point, I really don't know. Israel has to perhaps, like Nikki Haley said, drown out the noise and do what we need to do to get back our hostages and to destroy and dismantle that terrorist genocidal regime that is sitting on our border.
Let me also ask you about, in terms of both sides being treated as almost equal combatants, a democratically elected government and a terror group. We've got a new independent report, we're told, gone to the UN Human Rights Council, where Israel and Hamas have both been accused of committing a litany of war crimes and human rights abuses since the 7th of October. They've been caballed by investigators from the UN's Commission of Inquiry, basically saying that mounting attacks against civilian populations and murder or willful killings have taken place. Israel just as bad as Hamas, it would appear, is what the UN think.
Well, I think the UN have proven themselves to be an extremely biased and corrupt body. I want to remind everybody that they are the ones that fund the educational system that is teaching young Palestinian kids to kill Jews and not accept that Israel exists. So that's the UN. We've just had yesterday an expose on Francesca Albanese, the Special Rapporteur for Palestinian Affairs, that talks about extreme corruption in her office, also creating a network of anti-Israel, pro-Hamas Palestinians to try and kind of get rid of Israel. So the UN is an extremely biased body. They don't talk about, the Security Council hasn't condemned Hamas for October 7th, and they want to come and tell us that we're on the same level as brutal genocidal terrorists who raped women and killed babies. All we're doing is defending ourselves.
We do also find the extraordinary situation, again, when the UN talked about protecting women and such big campaigners, that the representatives who are supposed to be worried about violence against women seemed to be remarkably unsure whether their rape, brutality, torture, even though it was extraordinarily well documented with witnesses to it as well, had actually taken place. And yet, I mean, it seems to me, some Hollywood actor slaps an actress on the backside, suddenly, oh, this is a terrible time for women, Me Too hashtag and all of this. But brutal rape, torture, the absolutely foul way that women's bodies were mutilated on October the 7th, they're not sure that's even happened.
Julia, the hypocrisy is absolutely astounding. Not only that, there was a woman that was appointed by the UN, one of the UN commissions on violence against women, who came to Israel and concluded that there was sufficient evidence to say this had happened. But it's even worse than that, Julia. Where in the world do women have to prove in any conflict zone that they have to show evidence that they were victims? This is absolute double standard. And again, the UN is such a corrupt anti-Semitic organization that is essentially whitewashing dictatorships and giving them a platform and putting them on the same level as, democratic countries such as the UK, giving them the same amount of power.
They seem to have a much less concern about Assad in Syria or Sudan and the huge number of victims, where often the language is very hyperbolic and very, very critical of Israel. Look, you know me, there are a number of things that Israel has done both before and after October 7th I don't agree with. I certainly don't hold a candle for Benjamin Netanyahu as the Prime Minister, but nevertheless, leader of a democratic nation in power as a result of elections, the election system you have. I think it's perfectly fair to make criticisms, but it does seem to me that Israel is constantly held to a completely different level and account in a way that we don't even hold our own government or our own military.
Absolutely. Not only that, many members of your military that I've spoken to think that our standards in terms of the protection of human life on the other side are ridiculously high. Our own standards, the way that we protect their civilians in a way that they put them in harm's way is completely astounding. And again, the UN is become a completely bankrupt body of Israel haters. Just to give you some numbers, in an average year, Israel gets condemned 15 to 20 times, and a country like Syria or Iran maybe once or zero.
Yeah, there's the giveaway. Let's also just talk finally about Labour. They've just launched their manifesto here in the UK for as they are like to do, to be the next government on July the 5th of this year. And they, along with a number of other parties in the UK and along with countries like Spain and Norway and Ireland in the last month or so, have said they will give a recognition of the state of Palestine. What is the significance of that?
Well, I think it ignores reality and it ignores historical context. We have tried 5 times to make peace and ensure that the Palestinians have a state, and they've rejected it every single time. The last attempt was in 2009, not counting the fact that in 2005, we unilaterally withdrew from Gaza to give the Palestinians, that could have been the pilot project of the new state. You've got your Tony Blair here for 10 years doing state building with the Palestinian Authority. That didn't go very far. We have a much bigger problem than just throwing out these platitudes that we're going to recognize a Palestinian state. What are its borders? Who's its president? Sinwar or Mahmoud Abbas, who's become a billionaire on the backs of his people? It's all up in the air. It seems to me like it's electoral platitudes, and it has no connection to the reality on the ground here.
Okay, Fleur Hassan-Nahoum, Israeli Foreign Ministry Special Envoy, former Deputy Mayor of Jerusalem. Thank you so much for joining us.